World Cup third-place match is supposed to be a formality. Two teams that just had their dreams broken, playing out the string before going home. That is not what happened in Miami. England beat France 6-4, the highest scoring game of the tournament, and by the time it ended, the story wasn't just about the scoreline. It was about what Adrien Rabiot saw on the France bench during a hydration break, and what Cherki was doing at that exact moment. So let's get into the match that was supposed to mean nothing, and turned into the moment Rabiot lost it. Third-place games at World Cups are widely regarded as the one fixture nobody wants to play. Thomas Tuchel said it himself before kickoff, admitting flatly that none of our players and none of the French players want to play this match. Didier Deschamps wasn't exactly selling it as a classic either. Two teams, both gutted from semi-final losses days earlier, going through the motions for a bronze medal. Nobody plans a parade for, then the ball got kicked off in Miami, and none of that mattered anymore. By full time, the scoreboard read England 6, France 4, 10 goals. The most goals scored in any match at this World Cup. Bukayo Saka scored a hat-trick. Jude Bellingham put the exclamation point on it late, with a strike that sealed it. This was England's best finish at a World Cup since 1966. The actual year they won the whole thing. Not a bad consolation prize for a team that had just watched Argentina break their hearts in the semi-final. But while England were busy making history, something else was happening on the France side of the pitch, and it had nothing to do with the scoreline. Cherki, the 23-year-old Lyon midfielder who'd spent most of this tournament glued to the bench behind Michael Olise, finally got his minutes. He came on early, he didn't last long before Deschamps pulled him again. An in-and-out afternoon for a player who'd already spent the tournament fighting for scraps of playing time. Then came the hydration break, 10 minutes in the Miami heat, standard at every match this tournament, built in so players can get water and instructions in the middle of a half. Coaches use it to talk tactics. Players use it to catch their breath before the next 20+ minutes of a World Cup match. It's not a rest period, it's not a timeout to relax. Cherki laid down on the ground while his team was down, while France were chasing a game that had turned into an end-to-end shootout. One of their own players was flat on his back on the turf during the break meant for water and instructions, not to unwind. Adrien Rabiot saw it, and Rabiot did not let it slide. After the final whistle, with France having conceded 6 goals in a match they were supposed to at least compete in for pride, Rabiot went after his own teammates. He didn't hold back in front of the group, and he didn't hold back afterward either, calling what he'd seen unacceptable behavior. Coming from Rabiot, that's not a small thing. This is a guy who has spent his career playing enforcer in France's midfield. Someone who takes competing personally on a night when his team had just been embarrassed on the biggest stage in the sport. What makes it sting more is the timing. This wasn't a friendly in March. This was the last match of a World Cup. The last time this France squad would wear the shirt under Didier Deschamps, whose 14 years in charge would come down at that Miami match, offering his players one last opportunity to send off the man who established France as one of international football's most consistent forces over the past decade. And instead of a send-off built on fight, France shipped 6 goals while a bench player lay on his back during the hydration break. Cherki wasn't the only story of that scoreline. Saka's hat-trick and Bellingham's late finish will be the headline for England fans forever. A result that saw England past Mbappe and France 6-4 in a wild World Cup third-place game. But for France, the story wasn't just the 6 goals conceded. It was what one of their teammates chose to do while it was happening, and how one of the senior players in that dressing room reacted when he saw it. Rabiot wasn't alone in noticing something was off with this France squad in Miami either. This was a team that had already spent the tournament negotiating tension beneath the surface, over minutes, over roles, over who was carrying the weight and who wasn't. The hydration break just put a camera on it. And the reaction wasn't just Rabiot's anger in the dressing room, it rippled out. Within hours, clips of Cherki on the ground during that break were being replayed, dissected and compared against the 6 goals going in behind him. People who'd followed this France squad all tournament immediately connected it to something bigger. A player who had spent weeks complaining, at least privately, about not getting minutes, finally getting his chance and appearing to check out physically the moment the game got hard. To understand why that image landed the way it did and why Rabiot of all people was the one to snap, you have to go back further than that Saturday in Miami. You have to go back to a France camp that had been quietly fraying for weeks before 6 goals ever hit the back of their net to understand why tempers were this short in Miami. You need the full picture of how both teams even ended up there. France had gone into the tournament as one of the favourites to win it all. On Tuesday, France was thoroughly outplayed in a 2-0 loss to Spain, which will take on Argentina in the World Cup final, as France's elite offensive players were never able to get into the game against Spain's airtight system. Rabiot himself was hauled off in that semi-final after picking up an early yellow card. That put him at risk of a second, with Didier Deschamps turning to Manu Koné at halftime to try and change the game. It didn't work. Spain delivered a masterful performance to beat France 2-0 and advance to the World Cup final. England's route to Miami was its own gut punch. The following day, England suffered its own heartbreak when it took a 1-0 lead over Argentina, only to see La Albiceleste rally with 2 late goals for a 2-1 win. Lionel Messi supplying the 2 assists that sank England's title hopes, just as he had done for years to opponents across the world. Tuchel's team arrived in Miami, carrying the exact same kind of sting that France were carrying. A game they'd been seconds from winning, gone. That's the backdrop for a fixture that both camps had been dreading. Still reeling from heartbreak, France and England faced off in a World Cup match neither would have wanted, a third-place playoff, offering little more than a figurative bronze medal, with firm favourites France having been outclassed by stalwart Spain in the semi-finals, while England's agonising 6-decade wait for a major trophy continued, following a late, cruel defeat to Argentina. There were still individual stakes floating around the fixture, mainly the Golden Boot race. Messi and Mbappe both had 8 goals to their name heading into the weekend, with Mbappe, Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham all still able to pip Messi with a big performance in the playoff. That's part of why the match ended up such an open end-to-end shootout instead of the low-key formality. Both camps had braced for. Players with something left to chase don't sit back. For Deschamps personally, the stakes were bigger than any individual scoring race. The contest marked the final game of Didier Deschamps' remarkable 14-year spell as France head coach, with the World Cup winning captain-turned-manager overseeing Les Bleus for the 187th and final time, hoping to bow out with a victory. A manager who had delivered a title in 2018 reached another final, and strung together 3 straight semi-final runs was going to walk away from the France job for good after this one match. Everyone in that dressing room knew it, which makes the 6 goals conceded and what Rabiot saw during the hydration break land even heavier. This wasn't just a meaningless placement game, it was supposed to be a farewell. For his part, Deschamps had rotated his squad heavily going in. That's standard for third-place games. France were expected to rotate their starting lineup significantly, giving opportunities to players who have featured less during the tournament. And Cherki was exactly the kind of player that rotation was designed for. He'd barely played all tournament. This was supposed to be his chance to show what he could do on the biggest stage available to him, with a legendary manager watching his final match in charge. Instead, the match turned into a track meet. Saka scored his 3. Bellingham found the late strike that sealed it. And by the time the whistle went, England had banked their best World Cup finish since the year they actually won the thing. For France, there was no consolation. Just 6 goals conceded, a legendary manager's final match, ending in a defensive horror show, and a moment on the turf that Rabiot wasn't going to let go unanswered. That context matters because it explains why Rabiot's reaction wasn't some isolated flash of temper. It was the release valve on a tournament's worth of frustration aimed at a teammate who, fairly or not, had become a symbol of everything that had been quietly bubbling under the surface of this France squad since before a ball was even kicked in the group stage. Because Cherki wasn't just any fringe player having a quiet tournament, he'd been at the center of attention, for the wrong reasons. Since before France had even left home soil, by the time Cherki lay down on that Miami turf, he was already the most talked about non-starter at the entire World Cup. Not because of anything he'd done with the ball, because of everything that kept happening around him. It started before the tournament even began. During France's official send-off portrait with President Emmanuel Macron, At Clairefontaine, Cherki ended up in the bottom corner of the squad, photo spotted in the front row, of the official portrait striking a particularly uncomfortable-looking squat, while every other player around him stood normally. It blew up online instantly. Fans asked, "Is Cherki okay?" while another was left baffled by the positioning, commenting, "What's Cherki doing? What kind of pose is that?" The photo became one of the most shared images of the entire pre-tournament build-up, and his own teammates piled on. Days later, during a training session at Clairefontaine, the entire French squad lined up and recreated the pose. After the internet had gone into meltdown when the official squad portrait dropped and Cherki was spotted, tensed up in a bizarre, uncomfortable-looking deep squat while everyone else stood tall. Cherki eventually explained himself, and the explanation had nothing to do with anything dramatic. He said he'd been standing next to France's Minister of Sports and didn't want to block her from the camera. So he said, laughing, "It was simply a matter of respect. I was standing next to the minister. I couldn't be higher than her or block her from being seen, so I bent down. Harmless." But it set a pattern. Every time a camera caught Cherki in an unusual position, it went viral. And every time, his teammates and the public treated it as one more data point in the running joke of Cherki being Cherki. Then came a much bigger flashpoint, weeks before Miami. After a group stage win over Sweden, Cherki made a bold comment to the press about France's ambitions for the tournament, and it set off a genuine controversy back home. Footage of the playmaker went viral following France's 3-0 win over Sweden, with Cherki appearing to ignore Deschamps in a moment that drew considerable attention and speculation over a possible rift between player and coach at the tournament, though the player's entourage moved to clarify that his response reflected disappointment with himself, rather than disrespect toward the France manager. That's when Rabiot first stepped in publicly to defend him. Speaking to reporters at the time, Rabiot expressed surprise at the reaction, saying, "I didn't find it inappropriate. I really didn't. Understand the controversy and stress that ambition is a natural part of elite football and should not be misread as disrespect." He went further, insisting, "I don't think he lacked humility. Not at all. That's not Rayan's style. But he's a very ambitious player who wants to do well." At that point in the tournament, Rabiot was Cherki's defender in public, the senior professional standing up for a younger teammate, getting dragged for saying something bold. That's part of what makes Miami land so differently. The same veteran who talked him up in June was the one calling him out in July. Behind that public defense, though, Cherki's tournament had been eating at him privately. Reports out of the French camp described him suffering sleepless nights over his lack of opportunities at the tournament, despite arriving as one of the more exciting attacking talents in France's squad, with creativity and flair having marked him out. As a player capable of offering something different, from the bench in the latter stages of tight knockout fixtures. The competition for his spot was brutal. The competition for places within Didier Deschamps' forward line was among the most fierce of any squad at the World Cup, and Cherki found opportunities harder to come by than he might have hoped, as the France manager leaned on a well-established core of attacking options through the group stage and into the knockout rounds. It got serious enough that senior teammates stepped in to reassure him. Kylian Mbappé, Ousmane Dembélé, and Marcus Thuram all reportedly offered their support and reassured the playmaker that his opportunity at the tournament would come in time. That's three of France's biggest names, quietly propping up a 23-year-old who was struggling with being stuck on the bench behind Olise. Even after the Sweden moment, the read from people close to him was consistent. Cherki had been suffering sleepless nights over his lack of involvement, though those close to the player said he understood the intensity of the competition for places and the difficulty of forcing his way into Deschamps' plans. Then came the semi-final exit to Spain, and Cherki's frustration boiled over in public again, this time not about himself but about a teammate, asked in the mixed zone about Lucas Digny's rough night. After the concession that led to Spain's penalty, a question about his teammate's state of mind at the interval provoked a visceral reaction from the Man City man. Cherki hit back hard. "What do you think I'm going to tell you? That he was crying? That we shoved his head in?" "No," Cherki snapped. "These things happen in the game. It's football. We have to take him with us, and he has to be with us. We were all together. At halftime, we were all together. He also snapped when pressed about his own lack of minutes, simply retorting, "What do you think?" before ending the interview. So by the time Cherki finally got real minutes in Miami, this was a player who had spent an entire tournament being talked about instead of watched play, for a photo, for a comment, for sleepless nights, for snapping at reporters. He'd been defended in public by the exact teammate who would later call his hydration break moment unacceptable, and propped up privately by 3 of the biggest stars in the squad. When he went down on that turf during the break, it wasn't just a random image. It landed on top of everything that had already been building around him for weeks. Which brings us to the man who finally said out loud what a lot of people inside that camp were clearly already thinking. Adrien Rabiot doesn't have a reputation as someone who lets things slide. He spent his career as one of the more combustible figures in the France setup, respected for his engine and his competitiveness, but also someone who has clashed with teammates, coaches, and even his own federation over the years. That history is exactly why his reaction in Miami carried weight. This isn't a guy prone to overreacting for effect. When Rabiot speaks up in a dressing room, people listen because it doesn't happen every week. Even in the France-England match itself, Rabiot was in the middle of the tension from early on. Adrien Rabiot was the first player booked in the match, cautioned for stepping on the foot of Dani Olmo just outside the penalty area. Wait, that's actually a reference to the earlier Spain game, but it captures exactly who Rabiot is on the pitch. He plays right on the edge. He picks up cards because he refuses to back down from a physical contest, even in matches that mean nothing on paper. That's the same player who, hours later, was pulling teammates aside to tell them. The hydration break moment wasn't something the group could just brush past. What made it land even harder is that Rabiot had been on the losing end of frustration all tournament, same as everyone else in that France camp. He'd been substituted at halftime of the semi-final against Spain, after his early yellow card left him 1 card away from being sent off, watching from the bench as his team's tournament ended in a performance that for the first time in the World Cup saw France lose its way entirely. He'd fought through 3 straight semi-final runs under Deschamps, only to end his international chapter with this manager on a defensive collapse in a match that was supposed to be a going-away gift. So when Rabiot went after his teammates in the dressing room, after the final whistle in Miami, calling out the behavior he'd witnessed as unacceptable, it wasn't coming from nowhere. It was coming from a player who had given everything to that shirt for over a decade, watching 6 goals go in on Deschamps' final day in charge, while one of his teammates had been flat on the ground during a break meant for water and instructions, not a rest. The layers here matter. Rabiot was the one who publicly stood up for Cherki back in June, telling reporters he didn't understand why people were making a fuss out of an ambitious comment. He was the veteran willing to put his name behind a younger player getting criticized. That's not a small gesture in a locker room. Vouching for someone publicly means something, which is exactly why turning around and calling that same teammate's conduct unacceptable in the dressing room after arguably the most embarrassing scoreline of the tournament tells you how far the goodwill had been stretched. It's also worth remembering what kind of environment this France squad had been living in. Even the good-natured stuff, the recreated squat pose, the memes, the Cherki will not kill me one day jokes, had a current of needling running through it. In an almost squatting and clearly uncomfortable position, the attacking midfielder quite obviously drew laughs not only from internet users, but also from his teammates, so much so that some of them imitated his pose after a win in training, to poke fun at him. Teammates like these, it's probably safe to say Cherki gets the joke, and the whole thing can be seen as a sign of the good mood in the squad. Good mood, sure, right up until results went bad. Locker room banter tends to curdle fast once a team starts losing, and a France squad that had gone from World Cup favourites to a 4th place finish had every reason for that mood to sour. Deschamps himself never publicly waded into the specifics of what happened during that hydration break. His focus in the aftermath was on his own farewell, on a 14-year reign that had delivered a title a final and 3 semi-finals, ending instead with a defensive record his team hadn't shown all tournament. But the manager's silence on the specifics didn't stop the story from spreading. Once Rabiot's reaction became known, and the images from the hydration break started circulating, next to the 6 goals on the scoreboard, the two things fused into one story, a senior professional refusing to let a symbolic moment slide. On the day his manager walked away for good, none of this happened in a vacuum either. This was a France squad that had spent an entire tournament negotiating tension below the surface, over minutes, over one player's viral moments overshadowing his actual football, over comments that got read as disrespect when they weren't meant that way. Rabiot's outburst in Miami was the first time that tension broke into the open, in front of the whole squad, rather than being smoothed over. In a press conference the next morning, and it happened on the one day there was no next tournament to build toward, no next camp to patch things up in, just 6 goals conceded, a legend's exit, and a young player who'd finally gotten his chance laid out on the turf mid-collapse. England walked out of Miami with their best World Cup finish since 1966, a scoreline that will be replayed for years, and a hat-trick from Saka to go with Bellingham's late strike as the signature moment of Tuchel's tournament. For a team that had just been gutted by Argentina days earlier, that bronze medal mattered more than most third-place finishes usually do. It gave England's rebuild under Tuchel a marker to point to, proof that the near miss against Argentina wasn't a fluke, but part of a squad actually building towards something. For France, the ending was messier. Deschamps' 14 years in charge closed with a defensive record. His side hadn't shown at any other point in the tournament, on a day meant to send him off with one last win. Instead, the manager who delivered a title reached another final and built 3 consecutive semi-final runs walked away, watching 6 goals go past his own goalkeeper. Whoever takes over the France job next inherits a squad that just had its cracks shown to the entire world, in the worst possible match to show them. And then there's Cherki. He leaves this tournament with more attention, on moments off the ball than on it. The squat photo with Macron, the Sweden comment that sparked a rift narrative, the mixed zone blow-up after the Spain loss, and now the hydration break in Miami that set off his own teammate. None of it changes what he's walking into next. A starting role to fight for at Manchester City under Enzo Maresca. In a season where a positive World Cup was supposed to be an important springboard into a pivotal campaign at the Etihad Stadium. Instead of a springboard, he's arriving at pre-season, with a Rabiot quote hanging over him instead of a highlight reel. What happens to that relationship going forward is genuinely unclear. Rabiot was the one who stood up for Cherki in June, telling the press he didn't understand the outrage over an ambitious comment. Whether that goodwill survives what happened in Miami, whether the two of them patch things up the way senior and younger teammates usually do once the anger cools, isn't something either player has addressed since the final whistle. Mbappe, Dembele, and Thuram had all quietly rallied around Cherki earlier in the tournament when he was struggling with limited minutes, whether that same support extends to him now. After his own teammate called his conduct unacceptable in front of the group, is the next thing to watch for whenever this France squad reconvenes. What's certain is the moment itself won't disappear quietly. 6 goals against, a legendary manager's final match, and a player on the ground during the one break in play, built for water and instructions. That combination was always going to draw a reaction from somebody in that dressing room. It happened to be Rabiot, and given his history with this squad, his history of speaking bluntly when something bothers him, it's hard to imagine it playing out any differently. France's World Cup ended with a scoreline nobody in that camp wanted, and with one senior player making sure nobody forgot exactly what he saw happen while it was going in. Rodri helps Spain reach World Cup final with victory over France, Man City. How Spain neutralized Mbappe and France in World Cup semi-final, the score. Rayan Cherki enduring sleepless nights over France difficulties, Yahoo Sports. Rayan Cherki snaps at Lucas Digne question after France defeat to Spain, Goal.com. His statement was misinterpreted. Rabiot defends Cherki, Tribuna. Fans left in hysterics at hilarious Ray and Cherki pose for France team photo goal.com. Saka's hat-trick lifts England past Mbappe and France 6-4 WSVN. France versus England, FIFA World Cup 2026 third place playoff. The Statesman, https://www.thestatesman.com Sports France vs England FIFA World Cup 2026 third place playoff live streaming telecast kick-off time and more 1,503,618,050